Witches and edible housing go way back. I love gingerbread houses, but what I don't like is that the recipes usually sacrifice taste over design. So they might say, leave out the leavening ingredients so that the cookie dough doesn't rise, or over bake it even so that it's more sturdy. But at that point, I'm like, just make it out of cardboard. It's gonna taste the same anyway. So last year I challenged myself to make a gingerbread house that was cute and delicious. And there were 3 things I did that I think worked really well. The first is that I used a gingerbread recipe that actually tasted good. The second is that instead of gumdrops or shredded wheat on the roof, I used homemade marshmallow, which was really good. And then the third thing is that I thought about each element tasting good. So even the isomalt windows, I flavored with peppermint extract, so even the windows tasted good. So none of these things compromised the design, but they all made it taste really good. And I want to share that with you. So grab a cup of cocoa and sit back and see how it all came together. To start with, you'll need to sift your dry ingredients together, which are 6 cups plus 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, a heaping tablespoon each of ground ginger and cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of clove, 3/4 teaspoons of baking soda, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm using a gingerbread recipe that I adapted from a New York Times recipe, and I'll link to the written version in the description if you want to make my version. If you want to find another gingerbread recipe, look for recipes that use butter and not shortening. They should have a mix of spices like cinnamon, ginger, and clove or allspice, and they should have leavening ingredients like baking soda and baking powder. These kinds of recipes are designed to be tasty and not just functional. Next, you'll cream a 1/2 pound of room temperature butter with 1 1/3 cup of dark brown sugar. When everything's well mixed, add 2 eggs, mix well, then add 1 cup of molasses. Use a spatula to get every bit of the molasses, and then take this opportunity to scrape down the sides of your bowl and make sure everything is getting incorporated. This is the time to mix everything really well because you haven't added your dry ingredients yet. Once you add the flour, you have to be careful about over-mixing because you could develop the gluten and end up with tough cookies. Next, you'll add the dry ingredients in about 3 batches, scraping down the bowl as you go. I like to hand mix at the start so the flour doesn't fly up into my face when I turn the electric mixer on. At this point, your dough will be difficult to mix and you may need to do a bit of hand mixing. Be patient and mix just until the flour is incorporated. Once your dough is mixed, it needs to be chilled before you can roll it out. Do yourself a favor and divide the dough first into multiple sections. The amount of sections will depend on your design. I separated my dough into 4 sections in total so it would chill quicker and be easier to roll out. Chill in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours or until firm. Rolling out the dough is a pain, I won't lie to you. You'll have to be patient and persistent. I tried rolling it out between 2 pieces of parchment paper and it didn't work, so I ended up just using a small amount of flour. You're aiming for a 1/4 inch thickness. While you're rolling the dough out, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I made templates out of thin cardboard. The recipe link in the description will have all the measurements if you're interested, but basically it's 2 equilateral triangles and 2 rectangles. You will find it helpful if you slide the dough onto parchment before you cut out your design, so you can then slide it onto the cookie sheet without warping it. For the base, I just traced a large dinner plate instead of making a template. When everything's cut out, bake for 25 to 30 minutes or until the edges have just started to color and the dough is set. Baking time depends on the size of your pieces, so just keep a close eye on it in the oven to prevent burning. If you're going to make window panes, you'll do that next. I'm not an isomalt or sugar expert, I just followed the directions on the back of the package. It will tell you what temperature it needs to get to before it's hot enough to pour. I used aluminum foil under the gingerbread with the shiny side up so my windows would be as clear as possible. I spilled some on the window frame, but it's not a big deal since I'm covering it with icing anyway. While I waited for that to harden, I painted floorboards onto my base using a mixture of powdered food coloring and a little bit of vodka. Once everything is cooled or dried, you can begin assembly. I used royal icing as my glue. Royal icing is traditionally made with egg whites for strength, but you can also use meringue powder, which is safe to eat, so that's what I used. Again, I don't have a recipe for this, I just kind of guessed. It looks like I did about 4.5 to 5 teaspoons of meringue powder with 12 teaspoons of water and a pound of icing sugar. I advise you to look up ornamental frosting recipes on your own if you want precise amounts. You'll need to use more or less water to get the right consistency. You want the icing to be firm enough to stay where you put it, but slack enough that it's easy to pipe and blends with itself when you're flooding large areas. Professional bakers will have one icing for piping and one for flooding, but I'm too lazy to do that, so I tried to get it somewhere in the middle. I'm using a pastry bag fitted with a small round tip. If your piping, accents, or a design on your house, it's easier to do this first and let it dry before you assemble everything. The Martha Stewart rule of piping that I try to follow is to use the hand furthest away from the tip to twist and squeeze the bag, and use the hand closest to the tip to gently guide the direction of the frosting. It is possible to do this by yourself, just make sure you have some sturdy mugs nearby to prop up the walls while they dry. I waited for the icing to harden before attaching the roof. Instead of using royal icing to cover the roof, I made homemade marshmallow using a Martha Stewart recipe that I'll link to in the description. This method uses plain gelatin whipped with hot sugar syrup to create fluffy mounds of marshmallow that you can pipe or spread. You have to work quickly because the mixture stabilizes and then becomes hard to manipulate. I love using this as a topping because it doesn't matter if your roof is wonky like mine, you can hide all the gaps with it. It's also really delicious with gingerbread. The marshmallow will stay sticky until you coat it with something, so I used confectioner sugar, which also helpfully looks like snow. And I put a little cotton candy in the chimney to look like smoke. So cuteness achieved, I kind of want to live in it, and my friends and I enjoyed eating it as well. I don't pretend to be a good baker, I just like having fun in the kitchen and sharing my creations with people. So if you'd like to see more sweet or savory recipes with an arts and crafts touch, let me know. Thanks for letting me share something different today. Keep in touch and happy baking.